I had no clue what to do. I just knew something was wrong.
A brutal killing.
It was by far the worst day of my life.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
He was a little cocky, arrogant, hard to talk to.
About anything that comes out of his mouth should start with once upon a time.
We discovered there's a serial murderer working northern Indiana.
We got to the point where we were pretty much just losing hope.
The truth will be revealed.
He said, "I'll kill you like I did Teresa."
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Mishawaka, Indiana, a peaceful town a few hours north of Indianapolis.
It was a quiet community, not much going on. There's a nice river that runs through the city.
Homicides are extremely low. We may get 1 or 2 a year in Mishawaka.
I need an ambulance right away. What's the matter? I come home, my sister's passed out. I put her over, her face is crushed on the ground. She's still breathing? No. All right, I'll send somebody right out.
On arrival, first responders find 16-year-old Theresa Burns already dead. Detective Craig Whitfield is given responsibility for finding her killer.
When I arrived there, the neighbors were all standing out gawking because nothing ever happened in Mishawaka. Walking into the home, I saw straight ahead, there was a doorway into the kitchen. There's a stairway coming down from the upper level. And the victim's lying on the floor, face down, blood all over her face. And she'd been shot to death. It was a horrible thing to see.
Teresa was a smart person. She had ambitions of being a teacher. She was this cute little girl that blossomed when she became 16. My relationship with my sister was very good. She was very loving and caring. Worst day of my life. By far the worst day of my life.
To solve her murder, detectives must work backwards, reconstructing the final hours of Teresa's young life, starting with the moment her body is discovered.
Steve Burns, he showed up at the house at 5:15.
As I walk up to the door, I hear the phone ringing, and it's my brother, Tony. He was about second grade at the time.
His little brother Tony wanted to know if he could come home, and Steve said, "Sure, come on home." And so then he hung up the phone.
I look down and see my sister lying right next to me on the floor. I don't know if there's some kind of prank, so I kind of nudged my sister. Hey, Teresa, right? Joke's over, get on up. She didn't move. So I knelt down And as I started to roll her over, I had noticed a large puddle of blood that kind of bubbled up off of her.
Then he realized that this wasn't a joke at all and that she was dead. And then he called the police.
A few minutes after that, my mom pulls up. And I was not about to have a policeman that did not know my mom have to tell my mom that my sister was dead. And my mom just screamed and cried out and kind of fell down to the ground a little bit. And from there, things started to slowly just become more of a blur.
Theresa Burns was a typical 16-year-old girl in high school, dating boys and doing what 16-year-olds do. Nothing to indicate that she was some kind of wild child. Everybody who said she was a very good friend, or just a good girl.
I learned from Teresa's mom that she had received a phone call from the school about 10 o'clock that day, and that Teresa needed to go home to change clothes. So Teresa caught the city bus at about, I think, 10:15 and arrived home around 10:30 a.m.
And then at around 5 o'clock, Steve came home and found her. There was a couple-hour window there when she was murdered.
But there was some blood dried on her face, so it was pretty evident that it had taken place maybe a little while back.
Detective Whitfield examines the scene, searching for clues about the killer.
We checked the entire perimeter of the home. There were no pry marks, no forced entry. The person was either allowed into the home or the door was left unlocked and they walked into the home. Teresa was semi-nude. Her bra was pushed up. Her pants had been torn off and thrown into the kitchen. Her panties were down around her ankles. Just by surveying the scene, it would appear maybe it was some sort of sex crime that had gone awry. Was that part of the crime interrupted somehow, or did the person change their mind? We didn't know. What we did find was an ejector rod from a small handgun, which had fallen off while the weapon was being fired. I'd never seen a weapon lose an ejector rod like that.
An ejector rod on a revolver would be the rod that sticks in through the cylinder, making sure that the cylinder doesn't open up. You can kind of tell what type of firearm it could be because not too many firearms have ejector rods. When you have something that's left on the scene, then that tells me that they either wanted to get out of there in a hurry, or it could be just that it's an aftersight.
It was just a clue that I kept very quiet. I didn't release it to the media. I figured that, if somebody knew they lost a piece of evidence from their gun at the crime scene, they may ditch the weapon somewhere. The bullets were removed from Teresa's body in an effort to determine what type of weapon was used based on what we knew at that time. We believe Teresa was shot with an RG-10 handgun.
This type of gun was a cheap gun, not a well-made weapon.
It shoots a very small caliber, the .22 short.
The fact that she had been shot 4 times in the face, we felt was significant. If it would have been a stranger, 1 shot to the head would have been enough. But this was overkill, this was personal. And so it led me to believe that the killer knew her well. In all cases, we always start within and then work our way out. You don't want to put the blinders on and give somebody a pass because of who they are or how they're related to the victim. Her brother, Steve Burns, found her dead on the floor. He was somebody that we needed to check out.
The numbers of domestic homicides is much higher than stranger-on-stranger homicides. The fact that you're related, in most cases, means that you're a suspect. And so the police will look at family members to see who has an axe to grind with other family members.
One of the things that Steve had done that afternoon kind of gave us pause. Walking in the front door, straight ahead, her body's lying on the floor. And you'd have to step past Teresa's body to answer the phone in the kitchen. It was one of those things that there was a lot of debate within the department on whether or not Steve could be somehow involved in the case. What exactly is going on?
Within hours of her brutal murder, detectives have turned their attention to Theresa Burns' brother, Stephen.
I'm 18 years old. To know that I was a suspect really put a fear in me. What reason would they have to suspect me? I didn't understand it.
So we did do a polygraph with Steve.
It was during the polygraph test is when things really got scary.
And they would ask him, do you know anything about your sister's death? Were you present when your sister died? Are you responsible for your sister's murder?
I was terrified. They were asking me, did I get into an argument with my sister? Was asking if I threatened my sister, all stuff to try and get me to say something that wasn't true. I didn't have anything else to give them but what I knew. And I emphatically said, no, I did not kill my sister, Theresa Burns. So he leans over and he tells me that I failed the test. The polygraph says that you're lying. Okay, so I really am a suspect now.
Believing Theresa was killed some hours before Stephen made the 911 call, they question his whereabouts for earlier in the day.
Steve told me when I interviewed him that he was at work at Burns Rental, family business. And he took lunch at about noon with his girlfriend at the time. They went to the park. Then he went back to work. And then when he left work, he went directly home and found his sister dead on the floor. I called Steve's girlfriend, and then she told me the same story that Steve had told me, that they had gone to the park to eat lunch.
Also, at the fast food place, there was my best friend's mom worked there at the time. And so I would see her every day. So I had another alibi of someone there to say, yes, I was there at this place at this point in time.
So he had done exactly what he told me he had done. This polygraph came across that he flunked, but he went through a lot of trauma with his sister being murdered. And I can just imagine his response in the polygraph being associated with the trauma that he had gone through. So I felt pretty comfortable that Steve was not involved in this in any way.
It was always still there. Even though I knew I didn't do it, my family knew I didn't do it. I never was really angry at anybody. The only person I was angry at was the person that did this.
Vindicated, Stephen points them to a new person of interest.
Teresa had a steady boyfriend. His name was Sean.
I don't think Steve really liked Sean all that much. I think he was a little bit protective of his younger sister.
I'm big brother, so I gotta stick up, you know. You don't want to hang around him. You want the best for your sister.
And apparently Teresa and Sean had a quarrel, but that was just a few days before the murder.
It's not the first time that, you know, her and her boyfriend have had a problem.
I think Steve didn't know what it was about, but he was using, you know, harsh words toward Steve's sister. And he said some things to Teresa, and Steve Burns said, "Don't you talk to my sister that way." We had to interview him in depth.
Crimes of passion are normally emotionally driven. Is it conceivable and possible that the boyfriend might have been involved? You have to look at it. Did the fight that occurred turn things sour? It's a viable motive for murder.
We learned Sean was suspended from school. And he was home with his mom that day. And he says when Teresa came home, she called him at about 11 o'clock, talked to him for, I think, maybe a half hour or so. His mom verified that he was there, but then he had gone to the mall later on. It did occur to us that, you know, he knew Teresa was home that day. And sure, he could have gone to the house. We talked to his friends, and they verified he'd gone to the mall. All his friends said, no, he wasn't really acting weird or anything, and he was crushed when he found out that Teresa had been murdered. His reaction seemed to be genuine. We felt pretty comfortable that he wasn't involved in this case.
Sean reveals a critical new detail about Teresa's last day.
He said that there was a person at the door ringing the doorbell while they were on the phone. He felt like that was very important for us to know.
When the doorbell rang, he had told Teresa to be careful.
She went to check the door and came back to the phone and told him that, look, they needed to use the phone. And he told Teresa, don't let him in. So Teresa and Sean had continued talking for a few more minutes, and it was time for Teresa to hang up and get back to school. And just as they were getting ready to hang up from their call, Sean said he heard the doorbell ring again. That was the last time that anybody spoke to Theresa Burns. And he was right, that was very important. But we had to then verify his story.
While checking this lead, Detective Whitfield receives another tip.
I got a phone call from a detective in Florida, actually a friend of mine. He said, hey, you might want to take a look at this guy down here. His name is Michael Lockhart. He murdered a girl up in Lake Station, Indiana, and now he's down here. Maybe he might be involved in that Theresa Burns case. What was most intriguing about Michael Lockhart's case in northern Indiana was that Wendy Gallagher was a 16-year-old girl. She was murdered in her own home. They both appeared to have a sexual motivation to them. They were within close proximity. They're within an hour and a half of each other down the Indiana toll road. I mean, you could get to one place to another pretty quickly. As I started digging in, I found out that Michael Lockhart was a serial murderer.
Detectives learn serial killer Michael Lockhart has been linked to another Indiana murder just 3 months before Theresa Burns was killed.
If an investigator suspects that the killer is a serial killer. They would look at the victimology, if the victims were of a certain type, certain appearance, certain gender, things along those lines.
It kind of matched up with what I was looking at with Teresa's case, at least in general terms. Wendy Gallagher had been stabbed to death, which is a little bit different MO than Teresa's case.
After killing Wendy Gallagher, Lockhart went on a cross-country crime spree, which included armed robbery, rape, and the murder of another teenage girl.
So we run the NCIC nationwide criminal history search on him, check into his whereabouts, track his timeline, see where he was on January 11th, 1988. And it turns out that on the day of Teresa's death, he was in South Florida committing a crime there. So at that point, it made it pretty easy to eliminate him as a suspect.
With Lockhart in custody and his time accounted for, police are forced to move on.
Any murder investigation is a fluid process. So you're talking to a lot of people. You're trying to figure out what makes sense, what doesn't. Who else could there be? Who else can I interview? So you just look for more people to talk to, because you never know where that lead's going to come from.
They return their focus to the search for Teresa's mystery visitor.
We canvassed the whole neighborhood around Teresa's house. We were able to locate a neighbor that saw a young man on the day of her murder.
She did see somebody go up to the front door, so that's obviously going to pique your interest.
The neighbor reported seeing a guy going into Teresa's home at about 11 o'clock, which was about the same time that Teresa's boyfriend, Sean, said the doorbell was ringing. If it were been a stranger, she probably wouldn't have let him in the home. So that means she knew the person. We were able to get a general description for a sketch artist. She described him as just a medium build, dark hair, late teens, early 20s.
The picture looked like nobody that we knew. We had no clue. Not one of us in the family knew who he was.
We released a sketch for all the public to see, but this picture was so generic, it could look like everybody or nobody, and that's very frustrating. This was one of those cases where the media was very interested in it. The young 16-year-old girl, high school girl, was found murdered in her own home. Mishawaka then was pretty innocent. So the fact that everyone wants to see some resolution of this, yeah, there's some pressure that goes along with that. I had an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter, and I'm thinking, how would I feel if this happened to my daughters? So you want to do everything you can to find out who did this and bring them to justice.
1 month after the murder, Detective Whitfield gets a new lead.
I got notified that an RG weapon had been turned in to the Mishawaka Police Department. The gentleman that turned it in, his name was Les Snyder. Hey, look, I found this gun, just want to turn it in. But when I looked at this weapon, it's missing the ejector rod. I'm thinking, okay, this is the gun. The guy said he found it in the bushes down the road from his house. I took the weapon out and looked at it, and I discovered that it didn't have any rust on it.
When we receive firearms that are left out in the elements, that'll corrode or even rust a firearm. It wasn't outside. It was somewhere else.
And so, yeah, this is a moment where you start thinking, okay, we're onto something here. We felt that the gun was a key piece of the evidence, so we sent that to the FBI lab for testing. As I started digging into Mr. Snyder's background, it turns out that he has a stepson, Phil Jeans, who at that time was 17 years old. We knew that the suspect that walked into Teresa's home that day was late teens, early 20s. Phil Jeans did have a juvenile record, some drugs, and I think a burglary charge.
He was known to be a fighter. He caused a lot of havoc with people, kind of a bully.
Detective Whitfield brings Les Snyder in for questioning.
He said that his wife told him to get this gun out of the house because she had found it underneath Phil's mattress in his bedroom. The fact that Les Snyder didn't tell us the whole story early on when he turned the gun in, I felt was significant because it meant to me that maybe he suspected that this gun had been used and he just didn't want to be any part of that.
They look for a connection between Phil Jeans and Teresa.
I talked to a lot of 16-year-old kids, high school kids, and a lot of them, they were apprehensive, but I found out that Phil was dating Theresa Burns' best friend.
This was kind of shocking. We had no clue that Teresa's friend had dated Phil at that time.
Teresa's relationship with Jeans, I think, was my girlfriend is dating him, so therefore, we're hanging out. I never got the indications from anybody that they were friends.
But I was able to determine that Phil had been to Teresa's house before. So he knew where she lived. As far as knowing what a motive might be for Phil to use this gun on Teresa, it wasn't really clear for us. But now we have a weapon that we believe was used in the murder. I have a name of a person, Phil Jeans, who had the weapon. Now I needed to find out if Phil Jeans was on Theresa Burns' timeline. So the first time I talked to Phil, he came in with his parents. He was a little cocky, arrogant. He said when Teresa was murdered, he was living in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That's about 90 miles or so from Mishawaka. He said he was working at a restaurant job there and lived there with his brother. So if that would be true, he couldn't have been involved in Teresa's case. But I contacted the HR department at this company and found out that he had quit that job a week before the murder. I ended up talking to his brother, and he goes, Phil left, Fort Wayne, and he came back to Mishawaka.
The story that he originally told was a lie.
As they push Jeans for the truth, he implicates another teen, James Lewis.
Jeans and James Lewis were good buddies. So, they slept over at each other's houses. When you seen one, you seen the other.
We learned that Phil would carry the gun, then he would loan the gun to his friend James. He said that they kind of passed it back and forth. So now we need to find out more about James Lewis.
My mom, my sisters, none of us knew who James Lewis was. We'd never heard the name before. So it was like, okay, is this gonna be our guy?
Police interest in both Jeans and Lewis has now become public knowledge.
There was a lot of whispering behind the scenes.
Everybody had a story, and then these stories got repeated, and then they got repeated as fact.
When we're dealing with small-town murders, people love to talk. You have to listen carefully. You have to find a way to use their information.
It got back to me that James Lewis had made a comment to his girlfriend that he would kill her just like he did Teresa.
Police have two suspects in the murder of Theresa Burns, Phil Jeans and James Lewis. But they need to determine who pulled the trigger.
We have a gun we believe is the gun. The gun is being carried by two people who knew Theresa Burns.
The alleged death threat issued to his girlfriend, however, places the focus on Lewis.
James Lewis was a hard kid. He made admissions that he knew about the gun.
But he said he only fired it one time, and that was at a nearby gravel pit and just doing some plinking, and target practice. We looked at his whereabouts that day. He was starting a new job.
Investigators interview his employer to verify his shift.
James Lewis's alibi wasn't totally airtight. The days were off by a day or two. I pressured him on what he knew about the murder of Theresa Burns. Then he got upset. His lower lip quivered. He said, "Look, I didn't kill Theresa Burns, and you can't prove I did because I didn't do it." And he got up and walked out of the interview. When somebody walks out of an interview like that, it certainly keeps them on your radar. You don't have the ability to clear them out of the picture. It made it just that much more difficult.
Police are no closer to knowing whether it was Lewis or Jeans who pulled the trigger.
So we have to look at both of them equally and figure out who was carrying the gun. Was it one person or two people? Which one was holding the gun when the gun was fired and killed Theresa Burns?
With both men denying their involvement, the ballistics results on the weapon they shared finally return.
The results were inconclusive. And the examiner, he says, "I can't tell you you have the gun."
An inconclusive ballistic test means that there's not enough individual markings on the bullets or the casings for an examiner to determine if it was fired from a particular gun or not.
That was very disappointing. That was one of those low points in the investigation. Now, the gun I thought I had, I don't have anymore.
Without this critical evidence, the investigation begins to stall.
Over time, the case isn't in the public eye like it used to be. We're working behind the scenes to keep it moving forward, but at some point it comes to a slow, screeching, painful halt.
We're looking for answers. Nothing was happening, and it was just getting more and more frustrating. We got to the point where we were pretty much just losing hope.
I can't describe to you how frustrating it is to work a case like that for so long and not have the resolution for the family. We put in a ton of hours. We put in a lot of work. But more than anything, I wanted there to be justice for Theresa Burns, and that wasn't happening. I worked the case for 14 straight years before I retired. I had to leave the case behind. But I always told the guys in the homicide unit that I think the case is close to being solved. We're right there. We need that one break.
22 years after the crime, the case is assigned to Commander Tim Corbett.
Anytime you open up a cold case, you basically have to start from square one. Now we're talking 2010. This family has to go to bed every day and wake up every morning knowing that the killer is going on with his life. Sometimes the answers are already there and they just need to be refined a little bit. Other times you just have to start it from the very beginning and look at it with a fresh set of eyes.
Detective Corbett finds an adult James Lewis living life on the straight and narrow.
When you're going back 20 years on any case, the truth is easy to remember, lies aren't. When he had threatened his girlfriend that he would kill her like he did Theresa Burns, James was emphatic that he didn't mean anything by that. People make stupid comments. They say things in the heat of an argument. I think James got kind of a bad shake. There were people looking at him and blaming him for stuff. But I believe James told the truth.
Phil Jeans, meanwhile, has developed an extensive rap sheet, including convictions for theft, domestic violence, and battery.
Phil's got a big mouth. So 20 years later, you find other people in his life that he said things to. We learned the weapon was going to be sold potentially within days of the homicide, and Jeans let this person know there's a crime on this gun.
Jeans didn't stop there.
I spoke to several women who knew Phil Jeans. We learned he had a girlfriend, and he told her in very clear terms that I won't use what he was going to do to her. I'll kill you like I did Teresa. He didn't say, I'll have you killed by so-and-so who killed Teresa. It was I. It was always I. Everything starts pointing towards Jeans.
It's been 24 years since the murder of Theresa Burns. Now, cold case detectives believe they know who killed her, but need to prove it.
Phil was the one that was seen with the gun the most. Phil was the one that bragged about what had happened. Phil's the one that made threats towards everybody. It was very clear what our target was, and then it was a matter of taking his story apart. Obviously, technology has changed since 1988. Higher power microscopes, different ways of looking at things.
Police decide to retest their key piece of evidence.
In 2012, I was brought the ejector rod and the firearm, and I was given 4 bullet fragments to examine.
Detectives hope modern technology can help to seal Phil Jeans' fate.
I came to the conclusion that those 4 bullet fragments were fired from the firearm that was given to me.
It's finally enough for Mishawaka police to obtain an arrest warrant.
Tim Corbett called me up and said, hey, we're going to go arrest Phil Jeans today. You want to come along? It was pretty bittersweet to see him finally put into handcuffs. I wish it had been, many years sooner, but hey, it was a sight to behold seeing him being arrested for this. It took 20 years to get to this point. Now we have to make sure that we go all the way to the end and get to conviction and get him the time that he deserves.
Critical to their case is the timeline that lays out in detail exactly what happened in the last hours of Teresa's life.
January 11th, 1988, Theresa Burns left for school in the morning, and she needed to go home to change clothes. Theresa caught the city bus and got home about 10:30. contacted her boyfriend, Sean. While they were talking, somebody came to the front door and rang the doorbell. It was Phil Jeans.
Once Phil was in the house, I believe he had a plan. That plan was sexual assault. Phil is a dominant type individual. There's either going to be cooperation or there's going to be violence. This was a day that Jeans had mayhem in his mind, and Teresa was a fighter. Teresa wasn't just gonna knuckle under and roll on her side and just give up.
So Phil Jeans pulled the trigger and killed Theresa Burns.
After a 5-day trial, Phil Jeans is convicted of murder and given the maximum sentence, 60 years.
Phil Jeans is exactly where he deserves to be. He helped us put him where he is. Thank you, Phil.
It was a bittersweet moment because both of Teresa's parents had died, so they weren't there for it. It felt really good for me, but that doesn't hold a candle to how it was for the family. They had to wait so long for this to come around.
It took 27 years before we was finally able to put this person away for what they did. And unfortunately, there are so many other people out there that are in the same situation. They've lost a loved one, and they still don't have the answers, and they've kind of lost hope. I want people to know, do not give up hope. One of the things my mom wanted was, she didn't want my sister to be forgotten. She wanted her daughter to be remembered. And it's one of the reasons why I'm here today, is to be able to say, I'm doing everything I can, Mom, that people remember Teresa.